bullied black professors, brilliant revenge becomes his greatest lesson. Dr. Malcolm Washington stepped onto the sprawling campus of Westbridge University with a mixture of anticipation and determination. The prestigious institution's Gothic architecture loomed against the autumn sky as he clutched his worn leather briefcase. Inside were the lecture notes for his first day as an assistant professor of theoretical physics. "So this is what 20 years of study gets you," he murmured to himself, taking in the scene. Students bustled past, absorbed in their worlds of deadlines and social dynamics. Malcolm had graduated at the top of his class from Harvard, earned his doctorate from MIT, and completed 2 prestigious fellowships. Yet here at Westbridge, he felt like an outsider all over again. The physics department had never had a black professor before, a fact the dean had mentioned with uncomfortable pride during his interview. Malcolm's first faculty meeting was tense. As he entered the conference room, conversations dwindled to whispers. "Ah, Dr. Washington," said Professor Harrington, the department chair, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Welcome. We've assigned you the introductory courses this semester. I trust that won't be a problem." Malcolm knew what this meant. Despite his specialization in quantum field theory, he was being given the freshman courses that tenured professors avoided. "Not at all," Malcolm replied evenly. "I look forward to inspiring the next generation." As the meeting progressed, Malcolm noticed how his suggestions were either ignored or attributed to others. When he proposed a new approach to the department's research methodology, Professor Layton, a ruddy-faced senior faculty member, chuckled. "That's quite ambitious for someone fresh out of a fellowship," Layton said. "Perhaps you should focus on getting comfortable with teaching first." The microaggressions continued over the following weeks. Malcolm's office was the smallest in the department, tucked away in the basement next to the maintenance closet. His research budget was mysteriously delayed in administrative processing, and somehow his name was consistently omitted from departmental emails about important events and decisions. During a faculty lunch, Professor Layton loudly discussed lowered standards while glancing in Malcolm's direction. Professor Harrington often introduced Malcolm to visitors as our diversity hire, rather than acknowledging his academic achievements. In his classroom, Malcolm faced skepticism from students who questioned his credentials openly. "Did you go to MIT?" asked one student on the first day. "You don't look like a physicist." Malcolm maintained his composure, responding with dignity. "I not only attended MIT, but I graduated summa cum laude. Now, shall we discuss quantum mechanics, or would you prefer to continue questioning my background?" The situation reached a crisis point during the department's annual research symposium. Malcolm had submitted his groundbreaking paper on quantum entanglement applications, but was allocated only a 5-minute presentation slot at the very end of the day. As he set up his materials, Professor Layton approached. "Keep it simple, Washington," he said with a condescending smile. "Most of the audience won't understand your work anyway." When Malcolm's turn finally came, half the audience had already left. He began his presentation only to find that someone had tampered with his slides, inserting equations with obvious errors. "These aren't my equations," Malcolm said, maintaining his composure despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "Perhaps you should double-check your work before presenting," Professor Harrington suggested from the front row, generating snickers from several colleagues. Malcolm stood silently for a moment, looking at the faces before him. He'd faced prejudice before, but never so systematically, so deliberately designed to undermine his credibility and confidence. This pivotal section of Respect Earned, a University Tale, marks the turning point where Dr. Malcolm Washington transforms from victim to strategic changemaker. After enduring systematic discrimination, Malcolm reaches his breaking point at the research symposium where his colleagues sabotage his presentation by tampering with his equations. The evening after this humiliation, Malcolm retreats to his modest apartment to consider his options. He faces a classic dilemma that many marginalized professionals encounter. He could file formal complaints about the discrimination, but risk being labeled as troublesome or difficult. Alternatively, he could leave Westbridge University, but this would only reinforce the department's biases and prejudices. Malcolm astutely recognizes that neither conventional response would bring meaningful change to the institutional culture. In a moment of clarity, Malcolm articulates his predicament. "They expect me to fail, or to fight and get labeled as aggressive. Either way, I lose." This insight becomes the foundation for his unconventional approach. Rather than playing into the expectations set for him, Malcolm decides to circumvent them entirely by developing a strategy that will use his colleagues' own biases against them. Malcolm reaches out to his former mentor from MIT, Dr. Eleanor Chen, seeking both advice and potential assistance with his developing plan. This shows his wisdom in not acting alone, and instead drawing on trusted relationships from his academic network. Dr. Chen represents a connection to Malcolm's successful past and serves as a potential ally in his current struggle. Over the weekend, Malcolm carefully develops his two-pronged strategy. First, he will challenge his students with an apparently impossible problem related to his quantum entanglement research, pushing them beyond perceived limitations. Second, and more cunningly, he will submit his groundbreaking research to a prestigious journal under a pseudonym, James Barrett, combining his middle name with his grandmother's maiden name. This approach will create a controlled experiment on bias, allowing his work to be judged purely on its merits rather than being filtered through preconceptions about his identity. This strategy is particularly ingenious because it doesn't directly confront the discrimination, which would likely be dismissed or minimized. Instead, it creates undeniable evidence of bias while simultaneously establishing Malcolm's brilliance in a way that cannot be ignored or attributed to affirmative action. It transforms the narrative from accusation to demonstration, from complaint to undeniable proof. This section details how Dr. Malcolm Washington implements his carefully crafted strategy to combat the discrimination he faces at Westbridge University. After formulating his plan over the weekend, Malcolm returns to campus with renewed determination and purpose. The execution of Malcolm's plan begins in his classroom, where he dramatically shifts his teaching approach. Rather than continuing with his usual detailed explanations of physics concepts, he presents his students with what appears to be an impossibly complex problem. This isn't just any difficult equation, but one specifically connected to his groundbreaking research in quantum entanglement, the very work that was dismissed and sabotaged by his colleagues at the symposium. Malcolm makes a bold announcement to his confused and anxious students. This seemingly unsolvable problem will form the foundation of their midterm exam. When his students predictably protest that the problem exceeds their capabilities, Malcolm responds with a thoughtful challenge. He questions whether the problem is truly beyond their abilities or if they simply believe it to be so based on their own limiting assumptions. This mirrors Malcolm's own experience of being underestimated by the faculty. To incentivize engagement, Malcolm offers a powerful motivator. Any student who successfully solves the problem will automatically receive an A for the entire semester. This raises the stakes and creates genuine excitement and motivation among the students. He also encourages collaborative work, allowing students to tackle the problem individually or in groups, fostering a community approach to complex problem solving. The challenge quickly transcends the boundaries of Malcolm's classroom, becoming a campus-wide phenomenon. Students from various departments become intrigued by the impossible problem, and spontaneous study groups form in cafeterias and dormitories. This widespread engagement creates visibility for Malcolm's teaching methods and intellectual contributions, building his reputation among the student body. Simultaneously, Malcolm executes the second, more subtle phase of his plan. He submits his innovative research paper on quantum entanglement, the same work that was dismissed at the departmental symposium, to the prestigious International Journal of Theoretical Physics. Crucially, he does this under the pseudonym James Barrett, combining his middle name with his grandmother's maiden name to create a white-sounding identity that would not trigger the biases he faced as Malcolm Washington. This two-pronged approach is strategically brilliant. Through the classroom challenge, Malcolm demonstrates his exceptional teaching abilities and inspires students to push beyond perceived limitations. Through the pseudonymous paper submission, he creates a controlled experiment that will reveal whether his work is judged differently when his identity is concealed. Together, these actions set the stage for a powerful revelation that will force his colleagues to confront their biases undeniably. The execution phase showcases Malcolm's intelligence, patience, and psychological insight. Rather than directly confronting discrimination, he creates a situation where the truth will reveal itself. He transforms his personal struggle into a teaching moment, not just for his students, but for the entire university community. This critical section of the story depicts the culmination of Dr. Malcolm Washington's strategic plan, where his calculated risks and patience yield powerful results that expose the biases within Westbridge University's physics department. 3 weeks after implementing his plan, Malcolm's pseudonymous paper, published under the name James Barrett, has created significant buzz throughout the physics community. The work on quantum entanglement, the very same research that was dismissed when presented under Malcolm's real name, is now being celebrated for its elegant mathematics and profound implications. This external validation serves as objective proof of the quality of Malcolm's work, independent of the biased evaluation system at Westbridge. The section opens with a faculty meeting where Professor Harrington, the department chair who had previously sidelined Malcolm, enthusiastically discusses the revolutionary paper by the unknown James Barrett. Professor Layton, who had been particularly condescending toward Malcolm, eagerly suggests inviting Barrett to give a guest lecture, noting that associating with such brilliant work early could enhance Westbridge's reputation. The irony is palpable as the same professors who undermined Malcolm now praise identical work simply because they believe it comes from a different source. Throughout this discussion, Malcolm maintains a strategic silence, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Meanwhile, the classroom challenge Malcolm set for his students has garnered unexpected attention. When the day arrives for students to present their solutions, the lecture hall is packed not only with his students, but also with faculty members and even Dean Williams herself. This heightened interest demonstrates how Malcolm has successfully generated curiosity and engagement across the university. The student presentations reveal something profound. While none had completely solved the impossible problem, several groups had made significant progress using creative approaches. This outcome validates Malcolm's teaching philosophy and his belief in his students' capabilities when freed from artificial limitations. His acknowledgement of their achievements, "You've all demonstrated more capability than perhaps even you believed you possessed," reinforces the story's central theme about the harm of underestimation and the power of challenging assumptions. The climactic moment arrives when Malcolm turns to address the faculty members present in the room. He explains that the challenging problem he assigned was derived from his theoretical framework, the same framework explored in the paper by James Barrett that has captivated the physics community. After a carefully timed pause that builds dramatic tension, Malcolm delivers a revelation that stuns the room into silence. "I am James Barrett." The simple three-word declaration represents the collapse of the carefully constructed barriers that had been placed before him. In this moment, Malcolm exposes not just his authorship, but the undeniable evidence of bias within the department. Dean Williams breaks the stunned silence by asking why he used a pseudonym, opening the door for Malcolm to explain the purpose behind his experiment in perception, how the same ideas were dismissed under his real name but celebrated under another identity. The reactions of Professor Harrington and Professor Layton, flushing with embarrassment and looking at the floor respectively, visually represent their confrontation with their own biases. They cannot dismiss or rationalize away this evidence, as the contrast between their treatment of Barrett's work and Malcolm's identical work is too stark to deny. This revelation transforms what could have been a merely personal victory into a powerful teaching moment about bias in academia. Malcolm has orchestrated not just a vindication of his abilities, but a demonstration that forces his colleagues to confront their prejudices directly. Stunned silence filled the room. Dean Williams was the first to recover. "You wrote that paper, Dr. Washington, but why use a pseudonym?" Malcolm maintained his professional demeanor. "I experimented not in physics, but in perception. I wanted to demonstrate how bias affects the evaluation of ideas. When my work was presented under my name, it was dismissed. Under another name, it was celebrated." Professor Harrington's face flushed. Professor Layton looked at the floor. "My students," Malcolm continued, "just demonstrated something important. When challenged to exceed expectations, even when those expectations seemed impossible, they rose to the occasion. They didn't allow perceived limitations to define their capabilities." He looked directly at his colleagues now. "In science, we're taught to eliminate variables that might contaminate our results. But in academia, we often allow bias to contaminate our evaluation of others' work and potential." In the days that followed, Malcolm's revelation sent shockwaves through Westbridge. The university president requested a meeting where Malcolm presented documented evidence of the treatment he'd received. Rather than demanding punitive measures, he proposed structural changes: blind review of research proposals, mentorship programs for underrepresented students, and implicit bias training for faculty. The physics department underwent a painful but necessary reckoning. Professor Harrington, after initial defensiveness, approached Malcolm with a genuine apology and a commitment to change. Others took longer, but the culture began to shift. Malcolm was moved to a proper office. His research received appropriate funding, and most importantly, his ideas were evaluated on their merits. 1 year later, Malcolm stood at the podium during Westbridge's commencement ceremony, delivering the keynote address. His paper, now published under his real name, had earned him international recognition and a prestigious grant. "Education," he told the graduating class, "is not merely about the acquisition of knowledge. It's about challenging assumptions, including our own. True learning happens when we push beyond the boundaries of what we think we know about the world and each other." In the audience, he could see his former students, now his research assistants, nodding in agreement. He could see Professor Harrington, who had become an unexpected ally in transforming the department, and he could see new faces, young black and brown students who had applied to Westbridge specifically to study under him. "We all have biases," Malcolm concluded. "The question is whether we allow them to limit our understanding or whether we use them as starting points for growth. In science, as in life, Our greatest discoveries often begin when we question our most basic assumptions. As applause erupted, Malcolm reflected on his journey. He hadn't defeated prejudice through confrontation or capitulation. He had transformed it through excellence, strategy, and a fundamental belief in people's capacity to change when presented with undeniable truth. It wasn't a perfect ending. He knew the work of change would continue long after this moment, but it was a meaningful beginning. And for now, that was enough.